dissertation committee has arrived. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to the public portion of Danielle Adams' dissertation defense. And this work has been a long time coming. It is completely and totally unique. And I'm pretty confident in saying that it's probably the first and perhaps sadly the last dissertation defense that will take place in an actual planetarium, unless we have a stroke of good luck and this is the beginning of something very big. It is something very big. So without further ado, let me introduce Danielle Adams for her public presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Layla. And thank you to all of you for coming here today. It's fantastic to see such a crowd for a dissertation defense, and I hope we don't disappoint. I'd like to thank a few people here. So many of you are familiar faces, and I'm so glad that you're all here. I especially want to thank my aunt and uncle, Steve and Judy Reuter, who have come all the way from Albuquerque, and my advisor, Dr. Layla Hudson, my committee members, Dr. Scott Lucas, Dr. Yassine Nourani, Dr. Brian Silverstein, and Dr. Richard Paus. I'd also like to thank the Flandrau Science Center and Planetarium staff, especially Shepard Reed, Rosie Mankel-Stolifano, and Shiloh Fontes for making this all possible. This is indeed the first dissertation defense we've had at the planetarium here, and hopefully not the last. I'd also like to thank NASA and the Arizona Space Grant Consortium, managed by Susan Brew, for providing me with a NASA space grant for 2 years. That was critical to helping me complete my dissertation research, and much of what you see here today is the product of that research. That project was called Two Deserts, One Sky. If you like what you see here today, I invite you to go to onesky.arizona.edu afterwards. There's more information about other Arabian constellations and stars and celestial complexes. And the title here, Two Deserts, One Sky, comes from the fact that at the same latitude, the sky is the same. So the sky we see here in Tucson at about 32 degrees north latitude is similar to the sky that much of the Arabian Peninsula sees. And so it's meant to be a bridge across cultures. And here today, that continues. So this afternoon, we're going to be reanimating the Arabian star stories by peeling away layers of structure that has been imposed upon them over the past 1,400 years. So I invite you to go with me to the deserts of ancient Arabia. You can see that the sky is getting darker. The stars are in motion a bit here. We're coming upon the sky that you would see here in Tucson tonight about 8 o'clock. We're currently facing south. And as the planetarium lighting dims, we're going to change the slides to have red text to help preserve your night vision, which may take a few minutes to get adapted to. So as your eyes adapt, we're going to go through some core concepts here from my dissertation. So first of all, every culture has an astronomy. In the field of cultural astronomy, which is essentially the anthropology of astronomy, we use the term astronomies in plural to describe this fact that every culture in the world has a way of viewing the sky. And in fact, the term astronomy comes from the Greek astronomos, meaning star arranging. So it's just different ways that people arrange the night sky within their cultures. A fascinating thing about cultural astronomy is that the data is the same. I know of no other discipline where you can see the exact same data and then know that all of these variations is purely cultural differences that's causing the differences in interpretations. So as you start to see the skies here, what do you see? And more importantly, whose stars are these? The modern night sky has complicated origins. We have Mesopotamian and Greek constellation figures with Latin names like Leo and Orion. The brightest stars in each constellation have Greek letter designations, but most of the star names that are used are Arabic in origin, although most of those are actually Arabic descriptions of Greek astronomy, not Arabic descriptions of Arabian astronomy. In 2016, the International Astronomical Union set up the Working Group on Star Names to formally catalog the names of stars because of all of this complex cultural material in the night sky. This kind of catalog is useful to make sure everyone is using the same terms for the stars in the night sky. But as a byproduct, it tosses away alternative views of the sky, and therefore it flattens the sky. What do I mean by flattening? Well, if you've used Photoshop, when you make an image, you build in a bunch of layers, and then at the end, when you save that image, it becomes flattened. You can no longer see the details within each layer. And in the Arabian skies, there were multiple layers, and I'm calling this textures in the night sky. And the historical materials that we have today present this as a flattened view of the night sky. We only know that they say the Arabs believe this about the sky, or the Arabs called this star such a name. There's no further description of who among the Arabs, because in fact the tribes were very diverse and there were many different beliefs, something that we call multivalency. So my dissertation research focuses on the multivalent textures of pre-Islamic Arabian astronomy and how they were flattened by the Islamic adoption of Indian and Greek structures that reorganized the Arabian skies in new ways. Before I continue, let's unpack the term multivalency. It essentially means that one object has different meanings in different contexts. In the Arabian Peninsula, before the rise of Islam, there was great variation among the tribes, and this included designations of star names. As an example of multivalency, we're going to look at this group of stars, which is right over here in our night sky that you see in Tucson tonight. And we're going to turn off the projector at this point so that we can see the star field clearly. So this group of stars is an asterism, just means a group of stars. It's called the tent, al-khibat, and it's part of a larger group of asterisms, which is something that in my research I call a folkloric celestial complex. I use the term celestial complex instead of constellation because it's more fluid. Modern-day constellations really define the boundaries between stars, not the stars themselves. In ancient Arabia, there were groups of stars that were bound together with cultural meaning, and these I call celestial complexes. In this case, the celestial complex is the picture of a caravan campsite as it rested for the night. So we have the tent, al-khibat. This semicircle of stars here is al-ma'laf, the manger. And then we have a jagged line of stars that works up the sky. These are the camels who are tied together in the caravan, a sharasif. This bright star at the end is al-fard. It's a camel that is aloof and away from the others. So altogether, we have the tent, the manger from which the camels are eating, and the camels themselves, all depicting a sky scene. Now, these four stars here, the tent, were also called al-ahmal, the lambs. And we don't have any further context for this. A third name, that they bore was the throne of the sky raiser. Now, there are two stars, one here and one over here, that together were called the two sky raisers. This one up here was the spear-bearing sky raiser, because this star and this star together made the spear that it's carrying. This star down here is the unarmed sky raiser. And together, they're the two sky raisers, Asimacan. Now, in that context, these 4 stars represented the throne of the sky raiser, Arsh Asimak. There's yet a 4th interpretation of these 4 stars, and that is the rump of the lion, Ajiz al-Asad. Now, some of you who are familiar with astronomy may have already noticed high in the sky here, we have the Greek constellation Leo, the lion. The Arabian lion was far more massive and terrifying. We start over here with the 2 sky raisers, which in the Arabian lion were the 2 shanks of the lion. This group of stars, which is said to resemble the letter Aleph in final form, this represents the haunches of the lion. This bright star represented the sheath of the penis of the lion. Here we have 2 stars that represented the end of the mane. This is the forehead, basically the hairline. So the mane is all in here. Then we have this star and this star, which together are the eyes, the tarf. Moving over here, we have a pair of faint stars that represented the 2 nostrils of the lion at the tip of its snout. And it's difficult to see here, unless your eyes are already dark adapted. But there's a faint star cluster that in modern astronomy is called the beehive cluster. This, for the Arabs, was a nathra, the sneeze that the 2 nostrils sneezed out into space. The beautiful descriptive figure. Then we have 2 legs back here, so of course we have 2 forearms. This pair of stars marked the clenched forearm, Idara al-Makbuda, because it looks like it's twisted and it's not extended. It's clenched, holding something. This arm here, extending out this way, is the extended forearm. And these stars that emanate down this way were seen to be the claws, el-asfar, that emanate from the extended forearm. So the Arabian lion stretches across 3/4 of the night sky, from here all the way across to here. A giant, massive figure in the sky, consuming 7 modern-day constellations. The Arabian lion. So we have, we'll turn the projector back on. We have 4 names for 1 asterism. We have the tent, and the lambs, and the throne of the sky raiser, and we have the rump of the lion. 4 names for the same asterism, and this is the essence of multivalency. 1 object with different meanings that are used in different contexts. So let's get a little bit more background, and then we'll continue our tour through the sky. The stars were cultural texts that could be read by anyone who knew their meanings. Imagine a conversation, someone talking about the rump of the lion, and they didn't know what you were talking about, and you might say, oh, it's the tent. Oh, okay, I know it as the tent. These stars had different meanings in different contexts, and if you knew the language, if you could read the stars in that manner, then you could access those meanings. The star names were transmitted through poetry and rhymed prose, some of which we'll get access to here tonight or this afternoon. It feels like night because it's already dark. Mikhail Bakhtin is a Russian scholar who introduced the term chronotope to describe how time and space connect in literature. An example of this is a group of travelers on a road. So as they make progress along the road through physical space, this necessarily consumes time. And you can read through literature this trope that appears from time to time of travelers on a road. In Arabic poetry, the Nasib section is the initial part of the long formulaic poem called the Qasida. And in this section, we also have the chronotope in action, because the section typically begins with the poet lamenting the loss of his beloved when he sees the ruined abode or just has a recollection of it. And so, again, we have this connection of time and space. The ruined house, which exists in space, and the memories of his beloved, which is the time connection. U of A's own linguistic anthropologist, Keith Basso, extended the idea of the chronotope to the landscape features among the Western Apache. And here he found that certain landscape features evoked the history of the Western Apache, and because it evoked the history, it also imbued this with moral teachings, just from seeing a familiar mountain or other feature in the landscape. So my thought here is that we're going to use the term celestial chronotope to identify points not in the local geography, but in the celestial geography, the stars. And these points are designated as the chronotope, whose appearance in time and space embodies a certain kind of cultural significance. The chronotope itself is a communicative device. It's a category of meaning. It's not the stars themselves, but it's the function that they serve. Like the landscapes of the Western Apache, it is through the celestial chronotope that the star stories are told. There are three kinds of chronotope that I see in Arabic poetry and the rhyme prose. There is the guide star, stars whose positions don't change much. There's the celestial clock, as stars move through the night, and the seasonal forecaster, the stars as they progress throughout the seasons of the year. We're going to see examples for all of these. And at this time, we're going to turn the projector off, and it will remain off throughout the remainder of this presentation, so we can focus on the star fields themselves. So, first is the guide star type of the chronotope. And this is based on stars that don't change position much, and therefore they indicate consistently a certain direction. We're going to spin around to face the north. If you get a bit of motion sickness, just close your eyes. I'll let you know when it's all over. It can be a little bit disorienting. And as we spin around and come to rest on the position of north, can anyone locate the North Star? Well, we would take this asterism called the Big Dipper, take the two stars in the bucket here, and it aims right to the North Star. So we call this the North Star because today, in 2018, the axis of the Earth points into space right around this point, within a degree of this point. And so throughout the night, the stars all move this way around the North Star. And so it's our North Star. However, there wasn't always a North Star. We're going to go back in time to the eve of Islam, about 600 CE, and change our latitude to match that of Central Arabia. And we're going to see that over time, the Earth wobbles a bit. And the North Star wasn't always the North Star. For this adventure in time and space, we don't even need a TARDIS. So here we are, still looking north. We've got the same Big Dipper, Little Dipper. We're going to stop using those Western terms in a moment. And here we've got our current North Star. Back at this time, this star was called Al-Jedi, the goat kid. And these two stars were Al-Farqadan, the two wild cow calves. And neither of them were the North Star. The North Star, the celestial pole, is about here, and they dance together around this central point. So we're going to set the sky in motion. It's slow here, so hopefully no motion sickness issues for anyone. Al-Asha, an early poet who died in 629, said, "For when she set out at nightfall, she was seeing two watchers, the goat kid, which does not set, and the wild cow calf. And keep your eyes fixed here above the direction of north. And as we set the sky in motion, we'll see that this star, Al-Jedi, really does move over time." I'll keep our dot here so we can see the separation. There we go. We're starting to go. Look at that. The North Star is moving because it's not the North Star. So, the goat kid and the two wild cow calves are dancing around the North Celestial Pole, the extension of the Earth's axis into space. Therefore, these all together mark the position of north. And this arc of stars here, between the two, as well as this arc on the other side, were called Fats el-Qutb, the protuberance of the pole. And it was the protuberance that jutted out from the bottom piece of a millstone and contained its vertical axis. So it was seen to be containing the axis of the sky. These stars in the north came to represent permanence and steadfastness. The poet Hadrami said, "And by the life of your father, every brother will withdraw from his own brother except for the two wild cow calves." So everyone will go away, they'll all set except for these two stars who never set. Also in the sky here, we see our Big Dipper. Here we go. Oh, I used that Western term again. For the Arabs, this was Banat Na'ash, the children of the funeral bier. So these four stars, we've got one that just set here, were the funeral bier, the four corners of the bier, or else the people who were carrying the bier. And these three stars were the two children. They each had individual names as well. So this one on the end was Al-Qa'id, the leader of horses or camels. This, excuse me, so sorry about that. This next one was Al-Anak, the female goat kid. And then this next one had a few different names. It was a bit undefined. Mostly it appears to have been called Al-Jaun, which would be the black camel or horse. So they all had their individual names. Now, there's a star very close to this central one, and it's a fainter star. It was used as a test of eyesight, which actually has happened in many different cultures around the world. For the Arabs, the small star was called a suha. And people would say, "I show her a suha," which means the overlooked one, "and she shows me the moon." The saying is repeated again and again in lexicons. We don't know the exact application of it, but it was apparently a very common saying. If we look up higher in the sky, again, we have this group of stars we were just talking about, the goat kid, the two wild cow calves. Up here, these two bright stars were a pair of wolves. And up here, this group of four stars were the camel mothers, Al-Awa'id. Now, in the middle of them, there's a very faint star called Al-Ruba, which is the spring young camel who's been born in the spring. Altogether, this marks a sky scene together with this bright star, which we know today as Vega. But the word Vega comes from the Arabic an-Nasr al-Waqi'a, the diving or the alighting vulture, because it has two stars nearby it to make a V shape, which represents the wings of the vulture as it's alighting, getting ready to land. So the story goes here that these two wolves were trying to eat the young camel in the middle here. And so the camel mothers surrounded the camel to protect the camel. And then also this vulture is coming in to save the day and help them protect against the two wolves. So we've got this wonderful sky scene. Very little spoken about it in the literature because it doesn't happen to fall in other parts of the sky. We'll look at that in a moment. The alighting vulture is one of two vultures. The other one is currently straight overhead. The flying vulture, an-Nasr al-Ta'ir, and today this star is called Altair. It's the flying vulture because the two stars next to it are spread out like the wings of the vulture spread for flying. So these two stars were called together the two vultures, an-Nasran. In Arabic, we have singular and we have plural, and then we have a dual form. And this here is an example of using that dual form to mark two of something. The second type of celestial chronotope is the celestial clock. And this is based on the changing position or aspect of stars through the night. So we're going to go back facing south again. We're not going to rotate this time, so no need to close your eyes. We're going to change the time to about mid-October, 10 p.m., again, 600 CE, facing south. Perfect. So I want you to notice a few things in the sky here. We have the Milky Way going across, and we're going to make that a bit brighter so you can see it easily. There we go. We have these three stars, which were called El-Josat. You might know it as the Belt of Orion, but long ago this was El-Josat. A female figure, whose name is not very well translatable, has something to do with being in the middle. And this asterism here has a lot of symmetry. So these three stars are perfectly lined up in the middle of these two stars and also in the middle of these two stars, are here. So lots of symmetry. Up here, we have a famous star cluster known around the world as currently today the Pleiades, the seven sisters of Greek mythology. For the Arabs, this was a Thuraya. And it was such a magnificent asterism and so renowned that oftentimes it was simply called a Najm, the star. So if you ever seen in the poetry someone just saying the star, it means this particular group of stars here, the most favored star. All right, so we're going to set the sky in motion slowly here, and we're going to notice that the aspect of these stars change over time, and even the Milky Way itself. Roma, who died in 735, said the men with matted hair were cleaving the desert in its middle when the entangled mother of the stars turned. The entangled mother of the stars is the Milky Way. So notice that the aspect changes as we move. Here, the Thuraya, the central stars of El-Josat, it's changing quite a lot. And then we also have this very bright star. This is the second brightest star in the sky, and it's called Suhail. One moment. Suhail here is part of an old story with El-Josat, and then this bright star, which is one of the Shara sisters, and this bright star, one of the other Shara sister. Also, one of the four arms of the lion. So we're building up layers here, multivalency. So the story goes that long ago, there was this river. And the Shara sisters, these two stars, were together over here at home, along with their brother, Suhail. Now, Suhail was engaged to Josat, and something happened on their wedding night. There's different versions of the story, but somehow she was dead by morning. Well, Suhail feared for his life because her family was going to get him. And so he fled to the south, way down here to the south. Now, his two sisters did different things. This sister went across the river, and her name is Ashara el-Abor, the Shara who crossed over the river. This sister, however, stayed home, and she cried for the loss of her brother and also her sister who crossed over. And her name is Ashara el-Humaysat, the little bleary-eyed Shara, because she has pus in her eyes from crying so much. This is why her light is dimmer than her sister, who is the brightest star in the night sky. The amazing thing is that 50,000 years ago, this star was over here. I'm not saying this is necessarily a 50,000-year-old legend. It certainly could have been developed at any point in imagining that it crossed over, but it's a pretty awesome coincidence. All right, so we're going to advance the sky further now. And notice here with Suhail, as the sky advances, Suhail stays in the south. This is always marking the direction of south. Dhu'uruma again says, when Suhail shone like blazing fire, alone like the banished wild bull, and El Jozat glistened like necklaces, and the star having begun its descent after culmination, that's here, the star, Thuraya, joined with El Jozat ascending, as if from a view extended through the horizon, they were strings of pearls. And you can see this beautiful group of very bright, brilliant stars as a string of pearls. All right, so now we're at the point where a Thuraya is getting ready to set. And a Thuraya has two arms. This arm here is the amputated arm that extends down to this star. This other arm goes all the way this way, back behind your head to the modern-day constellation of Cassiopeia. It's the henna-dyed hand because this star here is a reddish star. And there are points articulated all along the arm, including this star cluster here, which is a pair of star clusters very close to each other, that for the Arabs was the tattoo on the wrist of the arm of a Thuraya. Dhu'uruma says, won't Mai come at night to the one amorously mystified by the mention of her name, when the hands of a Thuraya dip toward the western places of sunset. And here, a Thuraya is used as a celestial clock, and we're describing exactly this time when the two hands are dipping towards the western places of sunset to mark a period of the night, just as in the east, the sun is getting ready to rise. Also, a Thuraya was part of another love triangle. Following Thuraya is literally the follower, a Debaran, whose name translates and has continued into modern-day usage in astronomy. Aldebaran, I forget how to say it, not in Arabic. Then we have another star up here, bright star, which is called El Ayuk. This is the impeder of Thuraya. And the story is that Thuraya and Aldebaran were engaged, and the impeder tried to prevent their marriage together. We also have another example of poetry, again from Dhu'uruma. He features a lot in these poems because he was a great desert poet who emulated the style before Islam. And he says, I arrived haphazardly when a Thuraya high overhead was like an aquatic bird soaring, its rear parts, the follower, flying in her tracks, yet neither falling behind nor overtaking, with 20 small stars all around here, as if they, and he in the sky could speak, were camels that he led riding widespread, riding camels that were about to scatter away from him, both connected and dispersed, and one urging, that's also another name for a Debaran, is the urger of a Thuraya. One urging drives them to the water from the heart of the spacious desert on the first night of travel. So the third kind of celestial chronotope is the seasonal forecaster. And this is based on the rising or setting positions of stars throughout the year. The time that we're seeing right now is about 45 minutes to an hour before sunrise. The eastern sky is starting to get bright, and over time, the brightness will extend in the tracks of the horizons all around us. Now, this is a special time that was called ghalas in Arabic, time when the light of dawn mixed with the darkness of night and the red in the horizons. So what we're going to look at now is another kind of celestial complex that I call calendrical complexes. So we've seen with a Thuraya, folkloric complexes, also with El Jozat, and others of these. They make stories. The calendrical complexes are groups of stars that designate periods of time. I'm not using the word calendar here because a calendar is something that has regular time periods, and it's more of an idea. We say there are so many days in a week or in a month, and that's the calendar. It sets the time. These here calendrical complexes are stars that, when they set, marked the division of time. And it was irregular, and there were holes in the calendar when no action was happening. So let's take a look at a couple of these. First is the complex of the rain stars. There was a 6-season calendar that was in use here in Arabia at this time. And the rain stars, when they set at this time, the ghalas, so they would be setting over here in the west, they marked periods of time when rain would occur. So let's reset the sky to mid-September, still in the year 600 and still facing south. Okay, so over here, this square of stars was called the well bucket, a delu. It's a square because when you're traveling through the desert, you can't carry big, bulky well buckets with you. You carry a leather pouch. And when it's time to get water, you take 2 sticks and you cross them, and it forms a square-shaped spout at the end of the leather bag. That is your bucket. So the well bucket is a square. And when these 2 stars set, it marked the end of the year and the end of the season of harvest, a kharif. And when these 2 stars set, it marked the start of the year and the start of the intense rainy season called al-wasmi. The pre-Islamic poet Adi bin Zayd said, "During the autumnal season of fruit harvest, a rain period from the well bucket sent to him rain while the crossbars hung down low in the sky but were not yet concealed." So the Arabic term for the rain stars is al-anwa', and this term could mean the stars themselves or the rain that fell during the time when they were setting, or the time period between consecutive settings of stars. All right, we're going to advance the sky now to early November, still in 600, the same year. Now we see a Thuraya setting. And then close behind her, we see the follower. The follower was also called al-Mijdah, which is the stirrer up of rain. Now let's go to late November. And here we'll see al-Jawzat, right here, the central stars setting in the west. This marks the start of winter, al-Shatawi. And the pre-Islamic poet An-Nabigha, the Yani, said, "There came to him by night a pillar of cloud from al-Jawzat. The north wind drove frozen hail gently upon him." So we've got an example of cold rain and hail. Then the parts of the lion begin to set, and again we can see the lion stretching overhead. They start setting. This particular star, which is currently overhead, will set in a quarter of a year from now. When it sets at this time of ghalas, it marks the onset of spring and the warming of the air. When it rises during this time of night, it marks the onset of winter and the cooling of the air. And for this reason, this star, which was called the weather change, was also called the dog tooth of time, Nab ad-Dahr. And it was said the weather change is the dog tooth of time, which it shows smiling broadly. Now let's advance to late March. And we're going to see the first of the 2 sky raisers here, setting in the west. This started the period of summer, and let's now go to mid-May. And over here in the northwest, we have the other sky raiser setting. The period between these 2 settings was 40 days, and that marked the period of summer, a saif. After this, there was no more rain, so there's no more rain stars. Let's look to the east instead. In the east, we're now going to look at a system of rising stars. And the rising stars are not apparent in poetry. Poetry uses setting stars. The rising stars are expressed in rhymed prose. So let's go to mid-June. And I'll give you an idea of what this rhymed prose was like. This is our familiar star, a thuraya, the star. In Arabic, the prose says, إِذَا طَلَعَ النَّجْمُ فَالسَّيْفُ فِي حَدَمْ وَالْعُشْبُ فِي حَتَمْ. You can get the sense of the rhyme there. It says, when the star rises, the summer is vehement and the herbage is brittle. We're in mid-June here. When the follower rises, the rugged lands abounding in jagged rocks become vehemently hot, and the flies spread like fire. So we have sayings like this for many different stars as they rise. There doesn't have to be rain for these particular stars. It's an entirely different system, and the year begins with the rising of a thuraya, not with the well bucket. Let's advance now to early July. And we'll see Al-Jawzat rising. And let's advance further. We're going to move the sky just a bit here. So just after Al-Jawzat rises, in the west, we have our two vultures getting ready to set. Now at this time, we are at the end of July, starting to get into August by the time they get down here, and the rains are coming again. And so these are again rain stars that continue that calendrical celestial complex. Let's now go to, the end of July. And we've got the Shara who crossed over, rising. And then we'll advance. And you can see here how the sky brightens. And even this star, Shara, which is the brightest star in the sky, is difficult to see in the growing light of dawn. So, different systems of calendrical complexes. What happens? Well, despite the multivalent textures of these folkloric and calendrical celestial complexes, the scholarly presentations of these stars during the Islamic period is one of systematicity and order. These scholarly presentations are therefore contact zones that help us see how they interacted with this cultural material. Eventually, it produced an entanglement of Indian and Greek astronomies with these Arabian astronomical traditions, which ultimately ended up in a new visual and calendrical representations of the night sky. Indeed, much of modern astronomy comes from this smashing together of these different traditions. So, the regional celestial complexes, the calendrical ones, were very useful. It's important in the desert to know when the stars are setting and when the rain is coming. But over time, the setting stars were ascribed agency. They were seen not just as indicators that the rain was coming, but the very bringers of the rain. And this agency was at odds with formative Islam. So the rain stars were targeted by Muhammad and early Muslims as something to be avoided. Indeed, in the hadith, the collected traditions of Muhammad, there's a saying that appears again and again, and he identifies 3 different things from the time before Islam that should never be practiced. These are forbidden. The list varies. There are different parts, different elements that are in this list, but every time belief in the stars is one of those elements. It was public enemy number 1. And beyond this, Islamic leaders were loath to confess knowledge of the rain stars even 200 years later. As Islam expanded, during the Abbasid period, beginning at 750 CE and continuing through 1251, a translation movement happened, and Indian and Greek astronomical texts were translated into Arabic. And this provided cultural material that was ultimately able to displace both the rising star system and the setting system of rain stars. This was known as the lunar stations, and there were 28 of them. It was an impossible calendar because these lunar stations, although they were marked by existing Arabic star names, they were said to be equal distances apart in the sky and rising and setting at equal distances apart. The period of time of this was 13 1/3 days. You can imagine if you go a third of a day from right now, we're going to be in daylight. And it also didn't reflect the night sky. Many of these lunar stations were very dim and could not be seen in the growing light of dawn, as you see here. So this system of lunar stations was a discourse, and it was a hegemonic discourse that imposed order upon these older systems, which ultimately helped to eradicate the sense of agency from these systems. Also, among Greek astronomy, we have a similar thing happening, where the old Arabian star names were given to new Greek constellations. So, for example, if we look in our sky, we see here the well bucket, Adelu. This name was given to the Greek constellation Capricornus, which is the one who's pouring out water from a bucket. El-Josat, that name was given to Gemini. So these changes effectively flattened the multivalent textures of Arabian astronomy, reducing its observed celestial complexes and agency-laden celestial chronotopes to hegemonic discourses that impose regularity within a clockwork universe. We're going to end here with a final star scene. We're going to set the sky to the time of the pre-Islamic poet Muhalhil, still facing south. Muhalhil died in 531. He wrote this poem, which is called Our Night at Dhu Husam, as an elegy of his brother who died. And so during this poem, he laments his brother, and he's seen all these stars that they saw together. In this one excerpt, he references 11 different star names that should be now somewhat familiar to you, and he imagines them in new contexts. So let's listen to the poetry, and I'll mark the star names as we go along. O our night at Dhu Husam, I furnish myself with light when you have gone away, so you do not diminish. For when my night grew long while at the Na'ib, the short night was lamented. The whiteness of the morning rescued me from it, and surely I had been rescued from a big evil. As if the stars of El-Josat were new offspring filled with affection for a broken spring offspring. For they were sparkling, and Suhail ascended to them, appearing like the top of the male camel whose mating has been cut short and has withdrawn from the females. And the two Shara sisters, here and here, were inclining towards Suhail, down here, like the activity of the defamatory and jealous avenger. And it was as if the two maidenheads, which is part of this group here, typically the maidenhead is used in singular. This is the only instance where we see it in plural. The two maidenheads was a camel afflicted by the hand of a camel driver who pressed his stomach contents hard, as if the children of the beer, and now we're behind us, looking north, back over your heads, the children of the beer. Following were a train of camels embarking for greater Syria, leaving. They follow with the walking of radiant white camels in order to overtake all those following after, crossing over. And it was as if the two wild cow calves, again behind your heads, over here, were the two hands of a dice thrower, an oft-losing gambler who harassed his opponent, as if the goat kid, over here, in the doubling of a looped lamb rope, was a prisoner, or in the place of a prisoner, as if the Milky Way of the two vultures was a well-trodden path for each group that is spurred on in a caravan, as if the poor follower, over here, the follower of Thuraya, in it was a hired hand on a farm, or in the place of a hired hand, as if the planet Jupiter which is here, al-Mushtari, shining beautifully at the zenith, was a conqueror above some hills, as if the star over here, Athuraya, when it disappears just before dawn, were young camel calves roaming around on a rainy day, stars of a vile evening that lengthened and clouded over, for now it is morning, and so I go away sorry. This was 100 years before the development of Islam in the Arabian Peninsula by the poet Muhalhil. Thank you so much for being here today. And let's get the projector.